welcome to the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast, week number 17. Our chance at fantasy glory starts this week. Many of us are in fantasy championships, some in consolation brackets. Either way, there's still money on the line. And that is why myself and Tera Roberts are here to help you this week. Let's cross the finish line here, week number 17. Unless you're in one of those weird week 18 type leagues, then you know what? You're on your own because we're just going to week number 17 here this week. We're talking starts and sits. We're getting to your mailbag questions. And of course, we're going to make sure that we bring this all to you each and every week. We're going to tell you who's to start, who to sit, who we trust, who we don't trust, and then help you make those tough lineup decisions. As always, if you have a second, jump in the comments below and make sure to kind of get those other questions in there that maybe we don't answer. Drop them in the comments, and we'll get those questions answered as well here ahead of week 17's kickoff. Tera, what have you been up to here recently?
Oh, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, start sets, lives, all that good stuff. Doing waivers for a couple of championship teams. I had a little bit of success this year, so we're feeling mildly good. Good season.
Well, you know what? It's been a better season for us than maybe starting quarterbacks. I was looking at my pal Sal there, Sal Forte here, that he's talking about all these different quarterbacks. If you go on Twitter to Sal's Twitter handle there, and it's like 80 different quarterbacks starting so far this season. And you can add a couple more names to that list here this week. We've got more injuries taking place, especially at the quarterback position. Russell Wilson's getting that Derek Carr treatment here where money matters when it's all said and done. He didn't waive his injury clause or however that worked out there. So Sean Payton has basically benched him for the last 2 weeks of the season, which means, like Derek Carr, Jared Stidham is taking over there in Denver. So that's something to keep an eye on. We also got news earlier today that Nick Mullins, a guy that maybe you were trusting here in your fantasy championships, he's out and Jaron Hall's back in. I mean, it's like a quarterback carousel here that you've had to follow closely the last couple of weeks because if you're not working that waiver wire, if you're not paying attention to who's out there, you may have missed your opportunity. Now, before we talk about starts and sits, because I'm sure some quarterbacks are going to come up, especially some of these quarterbacks that we're going to talk about here from the waiver wire, is there a quarterback here that you can just believe in, like a Jacoby Brissett? Is it a Jaron Hall? Is it one of these guys that maybe is not a top 20 quarterback that could possibly be that guy to win you a ship this week?
Oh, man. I will I have one that you might not be a fan of it, Matt. So we might need to save my my quarterback that I would actually lean towards. Or maybe I just go with it. Maybe I go with it. It's Joe Flacco. Yeah, let's just go with it here. When we're looking at streamers, it's tough to trust a ton of them. Guys that I think you can trust, if you want like a steady, stable option, you can trust a Derek Carr. Like if he's on your waiver wire, if you have him as an option, that's a guy that you can trust. I don't trust a guy like Gardner Minshew in terms of giving you that upside to win a championship. When I'm looking at Joe Flacco, I buy into revenge game narrative. And I do think that he's going to be able to push enough volume because that's the key. He's been pushing aggressive volume. And if he's pushing that volume, even in a difficult matchup, I do think that he can get to that 20 fantasy point threshold. We've got like a double revenge game happening here with him and Elijah Moore. So this will be very interesting.
Yeah, you know I love myself a good revenge game, but this is not exactly a great matchup for Joe Flacco here on Thursday Night Football. We'll talk about Joe Flacco and how I feel about him, but the teams that he's put up some numbers. Let's not kid ourselves. Joe Flacco has put up some numbers so far here early on in the season, but it's kind of like that buyer beware type situation there when we talk about Joe Flacco because he hasn't really played a good pass defense yet, and I don't know if that's going to matter here this week. Like for me, Joe Flacco is one of those guys I'm kind of avoiding. He's been fantastic this season, but the Jets are allowing just 8.2 fantasy points per game. They've given up just, I think, 600 passing yards over the last 4 weeks. Meanwhile, Flacco, 311, 374, 368 yards passing in his last 3 games. But those are all against teams ranked 25th or worst as far as pass defense is concerned. We know that the Jets, they're the second best pass defense in the league. And if that wasn't enough to kind of scare me off of Joe Flacco personally, We don't know if Amari Cooper is going to play yet. He's dealing with that heel injury. So if you're looking for those last-minute sit and start advices, Amari Cooper is one of those guys that's going to be on the bubble because we don't know if he's going to play. I'm going to assume that he does because the Browns are in a position here to make the playoffs, and basically he needs to play for this Browns team to have success. But how healthy and how effective is he going to be? That's the question. Now, when we look at starts and sits quarterbacks here, Tara, who's a quarterback that you're starting and who's a quarterback that you're sitting?
A quarterback that I am starting is CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud coming back from that concussion. I mean, the one thing, obviously, it was a serious concussion because it was a multi-week absence. But the one thing you have to remember about concussions is that when you're coming back from them, it's not a performance drop-off situation. You literally immediately go back into the same type of performance level that you were at before. And obviously, it's been a while, so maybe people have forgotten. CJ Stroud was consistently a very, very strong start. Someone that we were looking at and saying, are we starting CJ Stroud or are we starting Patrick Mahomes? He was getting to that level in terms of trusting him, especially in matchup-friendly situations. And he's in a very matchup-friendly situation this week as well. So I expect CJ Stroud to come out here, guns blazing. He's got Nico Collins and Noah Brown, who obviously is a nice deep threat as well. No Tank Dell, sadly, but I expect him to pop back to typical CJ Stroud and be a strong start. And then in terms of my sit, I'm not a fan of streaming Gardner Minshew. And it's no offense to Gardner Minshew. He's a fine option. But the problem with him is that he just doesn't give you that upside level that you're truly looking for. He's not a guy that you can rely on to get you to potential overall QB1 performance in a week. We saw that with Joe Flacco last week. I just don't think that can physically happen with Gardner Minshew unless something weird happens where he's getting a couple of rushing touchdowns. It's like it's random stuff that you can't really depend on. And then also, I hate the matchup. The Raiders defense, it's not a layup. A lot of these defenses, when you're looking at them, you have to look at them in time snippets. You can't look at them from an overall perspective and say, this is their season as a whole. That's the team that I'm getting right now. We're not getting that team right now that we saw earlier in the season. We're not getting that overall statistics. The Vegas defense is absolutely on fire. And they're creating turnovers. And this is a situation where I can see Gardner Minshew throwing a couple of interceptions here. Maybe they try and lean on Jonathan Taylor even then. So it's just a very difficult matchup. I don't like it. You're probably looking at one of those Minshew floor games. And that's not really what you want to start in this fantasy championship. I will say in defense of Joe Flacco a little bit. He did do very well against Chicago. And that's another one where when you're looking at him, or that type of defense is another kind of time snippet defense. Overall, obviously, struggle bus. But since they made that midseason trade for Montez Sweat, their pass rush has just completely transformed the entire defense. So from that perspective, him doing well against Chicago made me look at Flacco and say that I do think that he can perform well in a difficult matchup because of what he was able to do against that type of defense.
Yeah, you know what? I love the Raiders coming back. This is a Coach Graham, Coach Pierce led squad right now that made Patrick Mahomes. And Patrick Mahomes hasn't looked good for a few weeks now, but they made Patrick Mahomes look rather pedestrian here last week. So I still believe Patrick Mahomes is more talented than Gardner Minshew. And that's going to be one of those big things here. When I look at Gardner Minshew, I've got him lower in my ranks. And you know me, I love Minshew mania. I trust the stash for the most part. I don't trust him this week, and that's why he's a little bit lower in my weekly rankings. One guy I do trust, it's Matthew Stafford. I'm rolling with Matthew Stafford again this week. Only Jalen Hurts has produced more fantasy points than Stafford's 110.2 since week number 12. So we have a good sample size here to work with. This week, Stafford gets to face a Giants defense that is allowing the second most fantasy production over last month to the quarterback position, allowing nearly 18.4 fantasy points per contest. So I'm not good at math here, Tara. I'm going to kind of go to you for this here, but I'm thinking if a team is giving up 20 fantasy points per game to a quarterback, and a quarterback over his last 5 games is averaging 22 fantasy points per game, then it's probably reasonable to assume that a 20-point fantasy performance is pretty much the floor for Matthew Stafford here this week. What do you think?
Oh, yeah. I love Stafford right now. Strong start, easy top 10 quarterback. The Rams are just gelling on another level right now.
They really are. The Cooper Kupp, Puka Nacua. Now, that's a story for another day because you don't know which wide receiver is going to have that big game week in and week out. And there's really no way to predict it, so to speak. It's just whoever, I guess, had the best breakfast date with Matthew Stafford that day. But as far as quarterbacks that I'm sitting, it's Tua Tagovailoa. We all watched what transpired last Monday night as Week 16 drew to that close. Watching that Ravens defense fly around, picking off Brock Purdy 4 times. They picked off Sam Darnold another time there. No team is allowing fewer than the 11.3 fantasy points per game than the Ravens have yielded over the course of the season. This isn't just a 4-week snippet that we're talking about. This is less than 12 fantasy points per game over the entire season. They also have a league high 54 sacks, and only the 49ers and the Ravens have forced more interceptions this season than passing touchdowns allowed. And with Tyreek Hill, anything is possible as far as Tagovailoa is concerned. But I'm looking at this, I'm like, I don't like this matchup for Tua, and I have to believe that when you drafted at the beginning of the season, you probably baked in the Tua risk here, knowing that injuries are possible with him, and you probably got yourself another quarterback. And this is one of those situations where I'd probably lean on that other quarterback, maybe a CJ Stroud, to start ahead of Tua Tagovailoa. Tara, let's head to the mailbag here because there are some questions, and a lot of them do center around Joe Flacco this week, including the first question. Rank these quarterbacks. Who are you picking? Tagovailoa, Baker Mayfield, Joe Flacco. Let's get rid of Russell Wilson because he's gone. Kyler Murray or Derek Carr. How do you have those guys ranked here going into this week? Because personally, I like Kyler Murray here. I love the upside that he brings. I like the matchup a little bit more than some of these other quarterbacks, but for me, it's his upside here. I know you talk about Joe Flacco, but how would you have these quarterbacks listed?
Oh man, Matt, you got me. I have not done my rankings, which is terrible because it's Thursday. But in my defense, the holidays pushed me back significantly. So I'm like a 1 to 2 day behind on literally everything. In theory, off the top of my head, it is Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Derek Carr, Tua, Joe Flacco. But I might interchange Tua and Joe Flacco, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough. I mean, Flacco's got a tough matchup. Tua's got a tough matchup. It all comes down to risk management there. Now, when we look at some of these other quarterbacks, you kind of mentioned you like Baker over Tua. I get that. So I guess the question is, Brock Purdy or Baker Mayfield this week?
Oh, we're looking for a Brock Purdy bounce back week. I think Baker will be fine. Matchup is not ideal, but I mean, when you're throwing to Chris Godwin and Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, I mean, it's no big deal. Purdy for the nice bounce back week here.
All right, another one of our listeners. Okay, I'm in the championship, and I'm unsure which quarterback to play. I have Jared Goff, Tua Tagovailoa, and Trevor Lawrence, and I can pick up Carr or Kyler Murray. His opponent is using Alvin Kamara, Sam Laporta, and Amon-Ra St. Brown against him. So that's Laporta and St. Brown. He's got Jared Goff, if that makes a big difference there on how you look at it. He could stack Carr with Olave. So first off, I'm not going to worry about who your opponent has personally. I want the best quarterback in there. I don't want to be that guy. If I don't start Jared Goff, and all of a sudden Laporta and St. Brown go off, now I'm not getting no points out of that. I don't even want to take that into the equation. So when I look at this, Jared Goff, Tua, Trevor Lawrence, Derek Carr, or Kyler Murray, Tara?
Kyler Murray. And I do, if it would, I'm with you. I don't see a major issue with starting a quarterback against wide receivers, but two of them does make me a wee bit concerned because the touchdowns are aggressively tilted that way. Gibbs is the really only other option that Goff could throw to. So yeah, that one concerns me. I don't know if I could do that. Yeah, it would be Kyler Murray for me. And I know that Kyler Murray has been very underwhelming, but my theoretical situation here is that I do think it's a good matchup for him, clearly, and chasing points, clearly. So this might be a game where he does have to have a little bit more volume.
All right. Well, again, we know Murray's above Tua Tagovailoa here. So the question is, Kyler Murray or Justin Fields?
Justin Fields.
All right, and the last one, and I know what my answer is to this because I faced this exact same question here in one of my other championship leagues. Trevor Lawrence, if Trevor Lawrence is out, and again, he didn't practice on Thursday, Jacoby Brissett, Tyrod Taylor, or Easton Stick?
I would go with Jacoby Brissett. I
Yes, you
don't
would.
trust Tyrod for high volume fantasy points. Yeah, I can't go there. It would be Jacoby.
So I've got this league, and it's fun because I've been playing the quarterback guessing game all season long, and somehow I've found myself in the championship. My quarterbacks are Trevor Lawrence, Russell Wilson, Ryan Tannehill, and I've been working these three quarterbacks. So I got the Russell Wilson news yesterday. And I'm like, hey, I need to hit this waiver wire. I need to go grab a quarterback. So I put in 2 quarterback claims. One for Nick Mullins, which I was like, hey, this is a good option here. I got a top 20 quarterback here if this goes through. Fantastic. And I'll put one in for Jacoby Brissett just in case, because you never know what's going to happen. And this is one of those leagues where it has to go through the waiver wire. You can't just pick someone up after the fact. So you need to make sure you get your guy on the waivers. So luckily, I got awarded both Mullins and Jacoby Brissett just to get the Nick Mullins being replaced by Jaron Hall earlier today. So like, okay, I guess, well, if Lawrence is out, Jacoby Brissett is the guy I'm trusting this week. So some other quarterbacks that we're trusting, if we look at my rankings here, and I did these rankings here maybe a couple days ago, so bear with me here a little bit. Jalen Hurts at number 1, Dak Prescott at number 2, Patrick Mahomes at number 3. And yes, I know what you're saying. Patrick Mahomes hasn't been good, but neither has the Cincinnati Bengals pass defense. So I like Patrick Mahomes to have a bounce back here. Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce. The Bengals are giving it up to wide receivers. They're giving it up to tight ends. This fits what Patrick Mahomes does best. Number 4 is Lamar Jackson. Number 5 is Josh Allen. Number 6, our guy, Kyler Murray. Number 7, Brock Purdy. Last week was the good, the bad, and the not so Purdy as far as that Ravens defense made that once front-running MVP candidate look not good. Now, the bad news is the 49ers, Brock Purdy, he had that stinger injury there. They lost just about every offensive lineman that they had. The good news is the Washington Commanders, the team they're playing this week, has no pass rushers. They already traded all their pass rushers, so Brock Purdy should be pretty comfortable back there. Not to mention they've allowed over 4,000 yards passing and a league-high 33 touchdowns. You're right. This is a Brock Purdy bounce-back week. Number 8, Matthew Stafford. Number 9, C.J. Stroud. I don't care about the concussions. He's had 2 weeks off. He cleared the protocol. He's talking to the media. He is back, and he's back in my lineup. Number 10, Justin Fields. Number 11, Baker Mayfield. Number 12, Tua Tagovailoa. 13, Jordan Love. He gets to stay this high because he does have some rushing upside to him. Derek Carr comes in at 14. Jared Goff, I'm a little lower on him. I got him at number 15 against that Dallas defense because we never know what Dallas defense we're going to get, and I don't want to take that risk here in the championship week. Number 16, Geno Smith. Number 17, Gardner Minshew. Number 18, Jake Browning. Number 19, Trevor Lawrence if he plays. And number 20, Joe Flacco. And I mentioned Trevor Lawrence there. I don't even know how this guy is still standing. We got a guy who's like had a high ankle sprain 3 weeks ago, a concussion 2 weeks ago, a shoulder injury last week. Zay Jones is out. Christian Kirk is out. I don't know how Trevor Lawrence is still stepping on the field each and every week, but I have a feeling he's going to play, and I am a little bit concerned about it. But, hey, sometimes you got to go with those guys that got you there, and this is one of those situations. Now, when we turn our attention to the running backs, Tara, which running backs do you trust, and which running back do you just fading all together here in week 17?
I'm trusting Ty Chandler. I know that last week was not ideal. It was saved by touchdown. Odd lack of receptions there, but that could change this week because we are getting the quarterback change and we could have the rookie quarterback a little more prone to dumping the ball off. But regardless, I don't really care. It is Minnesota against Green Bay, and Green Bay's defense is the most atrocious thing I have ever seen in my life. I am personally embarrassed by it. They should be ashamed. Joe Barry should be fired. They even, and this is not related to the run, but I mean just related to the fact that this is going to be a game where if Minnesota, even with Jared Hall at quarterback, can't put up a good amount of points on this defense, it would be absolutely insane. They won't have Jair Alexander. They are starting just complete nonsense in the secondary. Their defensive line is struggling. It's just a hot mess. You can run all over them. You can throw all over them. And they will lean likely likely on the run with Jaren Hall at quarterback. You want to make things a little bit easier for him. You don't want to, send him out there and say, hey, light it up, in the start here, rookie. So I would expect to see a lot of volume to Ty Chandler. Last week was a terrible matchup against Detroit. It was just a bad matchup. This is a beautiful matchup. We've seen what Ty Chandler does in strong matchups, and I lean towards him this week. Not afraid of Alexander Madison. Nobody should be afraid of Alexander Madison. Sorry, Alexander Madison. My sit this week is Khalil Herbert. I just don't want people to get carried away in thinking that Khalil Herbert is now a must-start type of player. He lead back. We got to roll him out. Pump your brakes, hesitate a second. Last week was expected. The only difference is that the majority of us thought that it was going to be Roshan that would have potentially a higher workload here. He still had a fine-ish game, but last week was against Arizona. It's just an ideal rushing matchup. Anybody and everybody can light them up. That's normal. That should have happened. Good for Khalil Herbert. Atlanta's defense is a lot tougher than Arizona. This is not a good matchup for him, and I just genuinely don't believe that we're going to see the type of performance that we saw last week out of Khalil Herbert. So I can think of quite a few running backs that I would start over him before I would dip into that area.
Well, if you watched the show last week, you knew to avoid Ty Chandler in that matchup against the Lions, because the one thing the Lions do on defensive side of the ball very well is stop the run. And that's one of those things that we said, hey, pump the brakes here on Ty Chandler. The volume might be there, but the production might not be. Now, Tara, I got to ask you this, because this is one of those weird type situations that you mentioned Jair Alexander not being there for this game for the Packers, who's typically been the best Packer defensive player, arguably the last couple seasons. And yet he is suspended for conduct detrimental to the team, not because of what he really did between the lines, but because he went out there and did a coin toss in his hometown in North Carolina. I gotta ask, as a Packers fan, as someone who spent some time in the Carolinas, how big of a deal is this? Is this something that he really should have been suspended for? I don't get it. I don't get where Matt LaFleur's going. This seems like small man syndrome for Matt LaFleur.
This is nonsense. The type of player that is on your team. Jair Alexander is a certain type of person, right? This is not outlandish. We've heard the way that he has spoken. He's got a personality. Okay. This is not odd. This seems like a very Jair Alexander thing to do. And absolutely, if you want to reprimand him or, go off on him, whatever you need to do as a coach. If you need to make a public statement about it, fine. But suspending him for a game when it is literally, it's straight up a playoff game. This is it. Win, more than likely in. Lose, definitely out. Why would you do this? This is just... It's dumb. It's absolutely dumb, and makes me just question so much about Matt LaFleur and not Joe Barry, because I already questioned everything about him. So,
yeah, and the Dumbass of the Week award goes to Matt LaFleur. Now, with that being said, you talked about your starts in your sits. My start this week, I'm going back to my man here, DeAndre Swift. And you know me, I've been kind of down on him a good portion of the season, and rightfully so. But last week, 20 carries, 92 yards, and a touchdown against the Giants. This week, another favorable matchup against an Arizona Cardinals team that just had Khalil Herbert run for 112 yards on 20 attempts. Arizona, over the last 4 weeks, have allowed 4 touchdowns and 539 total yards against backs. Now, the key for Swift here is to find a way to score before the Eagles get down to the 1-yard line when the brotherly shove kind of comes into this. Has any running back been tackled at the 1-yard line more than DeAndre Swift in the history of the National Football League? I don't think so. I mean, Swift should be way ahead there in fantasy points, but he's losing out on those touchdown opportunities. His rushing yards are there. He's right there. He's a top 5 running back as far as yardage is concerned. But every time he seems to get tackled right on the 1-yard line. And how do I know this? Because I have him in a couple leagues and it drives me nuts. But Swift, he comes into this one 12 yards away from his first ever 1,000-yard season. As far as the running back that I'm sitting this week, I'm sitting Jonathan Taylor, and I get it. I know you want to start Taylor in your championship games, and I don't blame you. I really don't. But we talked, Tara, about this Raiders defense. We talked about Antonio Pierce being a Raider. And by the way, Raiders, Hire this man. Take away that interim tag. This is your guy. He wants to be your coach. He's a Raider through and through. Have him. Al Davis would love this guy and what he brings and all the intangibles. He's a Raider no matter how you want to look at this. Coach Graham on the defensive coordinator side of things has his team playing as good as any defense right now. And let's take a look at this a little bit closer, shall we? 15.9 fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks to the running back position. The third fewest to the altogether there. Just 224 rushing yards allowed. That happens to be the sixth fewest over that same period of time. And Vegas, they're just one of 5 teams to allow less than 2 touchdowns. By the way, they've only allowed 1 to the running back position over the last month. If I look at all those numbers, Tera, I know Jonathan Taylor's good. He did not have a good week last week coming back from that thumb injury there. I think the Raiders have something going here on the defensive side of the ball that they know that their offense may or may not be able to produce. Heck, they didn't even throw a pass or complete a pass after the first quarter, and they managed to beat the Chiefs. That's how good this defense has been playing. Now, when we look at some other starts and sits and some of these questions that have come in, Travis Etienne or James Conner? And I love this question because I keep flip-flopping on this one. Tera, where do you stand when it comes to Travis Etienne and James Conner?
I'm going Travis Etienne.
Passing upside there. And see, here's the thing with me with James Conner. I'll get into it in a little bit. I don't like the matchup. I don't. But a lot of the times when James Conner plays, I don't like the matchup James Conner has. And yet the volume is always going to be there. And at the end of the day, somehow, some way, James Conner is one of the top running backs that no one's talking about. Every single week, it seems to be the case there. Another question here. Drop Brian Robinson for Clyde Edwards-Helaire.
Yeah, I would do that.
Absolutely. We don't know if Robinson's playing this week, and we know Clyde Edwards-Helaire is likely going to be the starting running back as Isaiah Pacheco looks like he's going to be out with a concussion there, that he took a knee to his own head, and then he went through a table. I mean, it was all kinds of weird things going on in that Raiders-Chiefs game. Now, this is one of my favorite questions here because you know me, Tera. I am definitely not an Austin Eckler apologist. There's no way, shape, or around that. But do you go to Austin Eckler this week, or do you pivot to Zay Flowers?
Oh man, I would go with Austin Eckler. I mean, yeah, I don't like it. I've been very hesitant on Austin Eckler, but I would lean that direction.
All right, you ready? We need 2 wide receivers, 2 running backs, and a flex. So let's look at what we got here. We got first world problems when it comes to fantasy football. We got Stephon Diggs, Chris Olave, and Brandon Ayuk. So which 2 wide receivers are you taking between Diggs, Olave, and Ayuk?
Diggs and Olave.
Okay, and then we got James Cook, Jahmyr Gibbs, or Breece Hall on Thursday Night Football. Which 2 are you taking?
Breece and Gibbs.
All right, so then that flex, we're looking at James Cook or Brandon Ayuk.
Ayuk.
All right, full PPR. I need to start 3 of these running backs. Breece Hall, Javonte Williams, Jerome Ford, Tajay Spears, or Khalil Herbert.
I would go with Breece, Javonte, and Jerome Ford.
All right, yeah, that Javonte Williams one's an interesting one because it seems like the Broncos are pulling back on him a little bit. But I look at Tajay Spears, the guy I can't really get behind this week. Khalil Herbert's another guy I can't get behind. David Montgomery, though, he's a guy I can get behind. So at flex this week, David Montgomery, Drake London, or KJ Osborne.
Oh, man. If Jordan Addison is out, it would 100% be KJ Osborne, to be honest. Yeah, it's dependent on Addison. If Jordan Addison's out, it's KJ Osborne. If not, if you need stability, I would go with Montgomery. But if you need upside, I would lean back into Drake London. Last week was a terrible matchup. He was bound to do bad. This week is a better opportunity.
Yeah, you know what? We're on the same thinking path here because Osborne, I think, would have been a lot more attractive if Nick Mullins was under center, not Jaron Hall. And then, you know, Montgomery, he's going to give you that rushing upside, that running back ability. But the big play ability here is Drake London. So if you're one of those guys right now that's going into this week and you're maybe the underdog, I think you have to go with Drake London, especially if you're a heavy underdog in the whole thing. Now, for me, here are the rankings at the running back position for week number 17. Christian McCaffrey, Kyron Williams, Jahmyr Gibbs, Rashad White, Travis Etienne, and Alvin Kamara are the top 6. Very little difference there when we talk about those 6 running backs versus the consensus here this week. At number 7, I have DeAndre Swift. At number 8, James Cook. At number 9, 10, and 11, I'm a little higher on these 3 running backs, and it is Derrick Henry at Houston, Aaron Jones at Minnesota, and I know we saw what's going on with the Minnesota Vikings run defense recently, but Aaron Jones offers so much in the passing game, and there's been so many injuries with the Packers that I feel good about Aaron Jones here. Number 11 is Josh Jacobs, and you know what? You could slide Zamir White in here if Josh Jacobs misses again because that's how good Zamir White has been. But Josh Jacobs, if he's in your lineup, he's an RB1. At 12, Austin Eckler at Denver. If you somehow have overcome Eckler's shortcomings this season, now is the time to feel good about plugging him back in your lineup. Denver has allowed 24.8 fantasy points per game to running backs over the last 4 weeks, including 3 touchdowns on the ground and 2 more in the passing game. And the last time that the Chargers faced the Broncos, Herbert, he ended up getting hurt for the rest of the game there and missing the rest of the season. But Eckler would end up running the ball 10 times for 51 yards, hauling in 5 of 7 targets for 49 yards. That was on December 10th, so it wasn't that long ago. And that was also the last time that Eckler found a way into the end zone. I think this is going to be one of those typical Austin Eckler games that we've been waiting for all season against the Denver Broncos. At 13, maybe my surprise here of the week, Chuba Hubbard versus Jacksonville. Jacksonville has been tough on running backs, but Chuba Hubbard's playing at a different level right now. 14, Bijan Robinson. 15, Joe Mixon. 16, Saquon Barkley. 17, James Conner. Yeah, sure, the matchup's not ideal. The Eagles are among the top 10 stingiest defenses in fantasy. But James Conner, I mentioned, he's got this way against good defenses just to continue to chip away at fantasy production. And he's also getting involved in the passing game, which we saw last week there. He's got 762 yards on the ground in 11 games this season. But the big thing is 5 targets, 67 yards, and a touchdown last week. If he's getting those targets in the passing game, look out. Number 18, Kenneth Walker. Number 19, David Montgomery. 20, I talked about Jonathan Taylor. 21, Raheem Mostert. 22, Breece Hall. 23, Ezekiel Elliott. At 24, Devin Singletary. 25, Javonte Williams. At 26, Tony Pollard. Why? Because I can't get on him. I can't do it. I won't do it. We know the Lions are a good team when it comes to stopping the run. Pollard has been held under 8 fantasy points in back-to-back games. We talked about this Lions team as being the 3rd stingiest as far as fantasy points is concerned over the last 4 weeks. They've given up just 316 yards total over that period of time. I'm expecting the Cowboys to air this ball out here and get Dak Prescott back into that MVP conversation. And did I mention Pollard hasn't even scored a touchdown in the last 3 weeks? At 27, Ty Chandler. 28, Najee Spears. 29, Devin Chan. Hey, if you're looking for upside, he's a guy to plug in your lineup. But, hey, I don't expect that upside here this week. 30, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. 31, Khalil Herbert. 32, Jaylen Warren. 33, Jerome Ford. 34, Brian Robinson Jr. if he plays. Number 35, Gus Edwards. And 36, Rashawn Johnson versus the Atlanta Falcons. Now, Tara, moving on to the wide receiver position. Who do you have as your start and who do you have as your sit of the week?
My start of the week is KJ Osborne. KJ Osborne has been someone who, whenever he gets the opportunity, he absolutely thrives. We've seen it this season before, earlier in the season. He played well once when they were still acclimating Jordan Addison into higher snap counts. We saw it last season when he was called upon to play in higher snap count as well, where he had just massive upside, strong performances. He had a 30-plus fantasy point game. He can handle volume. He's a good red zone target. He can be a deep play threat. He can play underneath. I mean, he's just very versatile in the way that you can use him. And I know we've got question marks at quarterback, but we don't have question marks at defense. I mean, we talked about it. I won't go on about it again. This is just a really good matchup for all the wide receivers. We're obviously going to see aggressive targeting to Justin Jefferson, and KJ Osborne could be the secondary option there in a really good matchup. So I do feel very comfortable. Even with the unknown at quarterback, the rookie at quarterback, I do still feel very comfortable with KJ Osborne to make a good impact this week. My sit of the week, it is Deontay Johnson, I just unfortunately, maybe he just doesn't have that favor with Mason Rudolph. Mason Rudolph starting again this week. Last week we saw him be dwindle down to literally nothing. Had that huge George Pickens game, and I just don't want to risk it. If you have the ability to pivot off of it, I would do so.
Yeah, that one's a tough one to figure out. I don't even know what to expect out of George Pickens here this week. I do know that I don't typically like to chase fantasy points if I can avoid it, and I feel that George Pickens could be a trap once again. Now, for me, when I look at wide receivers I feel good about, Rashee Rice comes to mind right away against the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals just allowed Mason Rudolph to guide George Pickens' fantasy sleigh last week, allowing 195 yards and a pair of touchdown grabs on just 4 receptions. Over the last 4 weeks, the Bengals have allowed 790 receiving yards and 5 touchdowns to opposing wide receivers, and that adds up to the 4th most fantasy points to the position over that time. As for Rice, since week 12, Mahomes has targeted Rice 28.2% of the time, and Rice has not had fewer than 11.5 fantasy points in any of those 5 contests. The Chiefs, look, he's averaging, Rice is, 18.6 fantasy points per game over that 5-week period. Since week number 12, that is wide receiver 5. So where I have him in my rankings right now as wide receiver 11, that may be too low. And that's where we're at when it comes to Rashee Rice here right now. As for the wide receiver that I'm sitting, I hope I'm wrong here. But numbers, I don't think they're necessarily lying. And that is Stephon Diggs, who is currently wide receiver, I think, 8 when it comes to PPR formats. But since week 10, he sits as the wide receiver 51. Wide receiver 51. Could you put wide receiver 51 into your fantasy championship, Tera? I'm asking straight. I get the name brand recognition. I know how good Stephon Diggs can be. But wide receiver 51 since week 10. That is something you cannot trust. You can't feel good about it. I get it. If you have better options, you're using those better options. If you have an Amari Cooper or Stephon Diggs, you're putting in Amari Cooper. If you have a Chris Godwin, I'm probably putting Chris Godwin in over Stephon Diggs. Now, I'm not going to go crazy here and put in a Gabe Davis over Stephon Diggs, even though, Gabe Davis has actually had better weeks recently than Stephon Diggs has. But he's, I think, in that period of time that he's actually had 2 wide receiver 52 weeks, a wide receiver 54 week, a wide receiver 53 week. He's been consistently bad. You know how hard it is to have 3 wide receiver 50 weeks? There's wide receivers who are horrible that have not been able to do that. And it's hard to ignore his last 6 contests in which he's been held under 35 receiving yards on 4 of those occasions here. That's a number that he'd only been held under twice in his previous 58 games. And we know New England, they're tough on wide receivers, the 11th fewest fantasy points this season. For that, I'm out on Stephon Diggs. If I have options that are comparable, a Nico Collins, a DJ Moore, Devontae Smith, Chris Godwin, I'm putting those guys all in over Stephon Diggs this week. Now, his name may come up again here when we talk about the mailbag. So, Tera, who do you got? I need one of these wide receivers here. Jameson Williams, George Pickens, Demarcus Robinson, or Rashid Shaheed?
I would run it back with Pickens. I know we don't want to chase points there, but there's a legitimate reason why that flip might have happened. So I would run it back with Pickens.
All right, flex question here. DeAndre Hopkins or Jerome Ford?
Jerome Ford. I'm struggling to trust DeAndre Hopkins right now, and he should receive some decently tough coverage this week as well.
All right, PPR, 1 wide receiver needed. Deontay Johnson, Curtis Samuel, Romeo Doubs, or Jerry Jeudy?
Oh man, this is very injury contingent. I don't know if I can trust Curtis Samuel as much as we were before, just because we saw how much Jacoby Brissett was leaning towards Terry McLaurin. So maybe Curtis Samuel just isn't going to be an option moving forward. We already talked about Deontay Johnson. Romeo Doubs, I could lean towards this, especially if we get Christian Watson out again, then I can lean towards Romeo Doubs. Dontavian Wicks and Jaden Reed dealing with injuries. Dobbs is the healthy one, so we go that direction. I will say Jerry Jeudy becomes mildly interesting if Cortland Sutton is out, and we've got this change at quarterback. I'm just saying.
All right. Well, I said what I said about Stephon Diggs. So what do you say when it comes to Stephon Diggs versus Adam Thielen?
I will not start Adam Thielen. No, Stephon Diggs. I can't do it.
All right.
Yep.
And then when we're looking at the waiver wire, because I'm sure some of these guys are on here, could you give me an early rank on the waiver wire wide receivers here in half PPR? KJ Osborne, Josh Palmer, Rashid Shaheed. Currently, I have Ridley, Dobbs, and OBJ. One of those guys could be my wide receiver 3. But I guess the question is, Josh Dobbs, Osborne, or Shaheed, and would you start any one of those over maybe Odell Beckham Jr.?
Oh yeah, I would start Osborne and Shaheed. Shaheed because I do like the matchup. So I would start both of them, Osborne and Shaheed over OBJ.
All right, and now my week 17 rankings at the wide receiver position. CeeDee Lamb, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, A.J. Brown, Justin Jefferson. I'm kind of wavering now with Jaron Hall, but I'm going to stick with him at 5. Chris Olave. I love Chris Olave. Derek Carr targeted him 13 times last Thursday night, helping Olave to a 23-point fantasy performance on a bad ankle. Olave, he's averaging 17.9 fantasy points over the last 4 weeks there. He's also got the 10th most fantasy points per game by a wide receiver since week number 12. So there's where you can trust Olave again this week. Another guy I trust is Mike Evans going against New Orleans. No, Lattimore means more. Mike Evans, number 8, Puka Nacua. Number 9, Brandon Ayuk. Number 10 is my guy there, Michael Pittman. Number 11, Rashee Rice. 12, Deebo Samuel, followed by Cooper Kupp, Devontae Adams. Garrett Wilson is an interesting one for me here at 15 on Thursday Night Football. Tough matchup. I think this is a volume play as far as wide receivers are concerned. Even in a bad matchup, Trevor Siemian seems to have been targeting him and Breece Hall as far as the passing game is concerned. At 16, DK Metcalf. At 17, I have Amari Cooper in there right now. Make sure that you're paying attention to the injury part ahead of tonight's contest. 18, Drake London. I'm banking on upside here against the Browns. Against the Bears this week. Number 19, DeAndre Hopkins. 20, DJ Moore. 21, Nico Collins. He made his return to your fantasy lineups. He didn't do much, but he still found his way to a touchdown and 13 fantasy points. He has 3 targets inside the 5-yard line over the last 4 weeks. That includes missing back in week number 15 there. Collins also sits 4th amongst pass catchers in yards per route run this season, averaging 2.78. And did we mention CJ Stroud's coming back? Start Nico Collins and feel good about it. Number 22, Devontae Smith. 23, Chris Godwin. 24, Cortland Sutton. Again, this is if he's healthy. 25, George Pickens. 26, here's where I have Stephon Diggs, just outside of wide receiver 2 range and much higher than he's been performing. 27, T. Higgins. 28, Romeo Doubs. I love it. Packers wide receivers all seem to be hurt at the same time. 29, Tyler Lockett. 30, Calvin Ridley. Again, this is not a knock on Calvin Ridley. This is more of a knock on what we're going to get with Trevor Lawrence. I think this is one of those games where you're playing the Carolina Panthers, a team that teams have been able to run the ball on. Expect a lot of Travis Etienne. Expect the Jaguars to run the ball, which means we're going to take the ball out of Trevor Lawrence's hands because he gets hammered every time he has the ball, and that means less opportunities for Calvin Ridley. At 31, I got Terry McLaurin. No team in the league has allowed more catching, more receptions to opposing perimeter wide receivers, and overall, the 49ers defense has allowed the 9th most points to the wide receiver position. At 32, here we go. Brandon Cooks, KJ Osborne, Zay Flowers, DeMario Douglas at 35. 36, Adam Thielen. Number 37, Noah Brown, who may sneak up a little bit higher here as the week goes on. Number 38, Jaden Reed. 39, Deontay Johnson. 40, Jacoby Myers. Now from 41 to 50, here we go. Curtis Samuel, Josh Palmer, Demarcus Robinson, Tyler Boyd, Gabe Davis, Rashid Shaheed, Darius Slayton, Devontae Parker, Wan'Dale Robinson, and Jackson Smith and Jigba round out the top 50 wide receivers here in week number 17. Now let's talk tight ends, Tara. Who's a tight end you're starting? Who's a tight end you're sitting?
A tight end, then I'm sorry. I'm tired. I could have. I'm so tired, guys. A tight end that I am starting is Tucker Kraft this week. If there's someone who you just need a guaranteed double-digit fantasy points out of, and sometimes that is literally all you're asking for out of your tight end, it's Tucker Kraft. It's been consistent, incredibly consistent. Literally 4 catches in each of the last 3 games. Since he has become the starter in all but one game, he has reached about double-digit targets, kind of rounding up on one fantasy performance where it was 9.5, but double-digit fantasy point performances in 4 out of 5 games there. He's a touchdown threat. He has a guy that you can just, that what you're going to get out of him. He's on the field constantly. He is earned some trust and reliability there. And most importantly, he's playing with a extremely banged up receiving core. We talked about it. We've got Christian Watson dealing with his hamstring injury. I doubt that he comes back this week. We've got Jaden Reed, who missed last week with an injury. We've got Dontavian Wicks, who got injured during last week's game. So this is just such a beat up wide receiver core. So Tucker Kraft has been a nice, steady, reliable target there. And my sit of the week, we can't trust Pat Freiermuth. He was a sit for me last week. I can't get there with him, unfortunately. We got that random mirage of a big fantasy point performance when he came back from the injury there. And after that, it's just been absolutely nothing. I can't trust it. I don't know why they have opted out of Pat Freiermuth, but it seems that he is no longer part of their game plan.
Well, one tight end that I like more than Pat Freiermuth is one of those matchup-based starters, and this is actually a matchup that I do believe you could trust Gerald Everett in this week. Last week, Everett was targeted 8 times, hauling 7 of them for 42 yards. This week, I expect a very similar type line here as the Chargers face a Broncos defense that is allowing a league-high 16.5 fantasy points per game this season to the position. They've given up 995 receiving yards and 10 touchdowns along the way. Even in the last 4 games, this is a trend that has continued. The Broncos have allowed 4 touchdowns on 20 receptions, 220 yards, 16.5 fantasy points per game. So I feel pretty good about Gerald Everett. I know, Tera, we made fun of Gerald Everett all season long about matchups and him and this and that. This is one I actually feel pretty good about, and that's saying something. As for the sit, one of my guys I've loved all season long has been Dalton Schultz. I just don't like him against the Tennessee Titans. You need touchdowns. Touchdowns matter for the tight end position, and I don't think you're going to get them against the Tennessee Titans team that has allowed only 1 touchdown to opposing tight ends in the previous 16 weeks. That's right. The Titans are the only team that has given up 1 or fewer touchdowns to the position. They are holding teams to under 10 fantasy points. So if you're coming home with a ship this week, you're going to need a tight end to give you at least double-digit production, and I don't see Dalton Schultz being able to do that here in this contest. Now, Tara, when we look at these other matchups here, I told you how much I love Gerald Everett. I also like Kyle Pitts this week as well. So Everett or Kyle Pitts?
I would still go with Everett.
All right. Another 2 good. First world problems here. David Njoku has been one of the best tight ends recently, where Joe Flacco has seemed to unlock his fantasy potential, or Evan Ingram.
I would go with Joe Flacco. I would go with Joe Flacco's tight end, David Njoku.
And all right, we got a flex question here. Terry McLaurin, I kind of mentioned those numbers at the San Francisco 49ers are giving out 2 perimeter wide receivers, or Isaiah Likely this week.
I would go with Terry McLaurin. Isaiah Likely obviously had been steady up until last week, and you can make an argument in terms of defensive matchup as to why that happened. So, you could get a nice bounce back week for him here, but with Jacoby Brissett at quarterback, I might be more willing to take that risk with Terry.
All right, with that said, here are my top, let's go 20 tight ends here for week 17. Travis Kelce, Trey McBride, George Kittle, David Njoku, Sam Laporta. Jake Ferguson comes in at number 6. The Lions defense, they're good as far as the run is concerned, but they are allowing fantasy production to both the wide receiver and tight end positions. On the season, the Lions have allowed the 10th most fantasy points to the tight end position over the last 4 weeks. They're allowing on average 15.8 fantasy points per game, which happens to be the 8th most. Look for Ferguson to continue to be featured when the Cowboys get down in the red zone, where he's been targeted 6 times in the last 4 weeks, including 2 targets inside the 5. So that's one of those things. The Cowboys and Dak Prescott, they're looking for Ferguson down there where they're looking to score. Number 7, Evan Ingram. Number 8, Gerald Everett. Number 9, Isaiah Likely. The Dolphins, they're tough on tight ends, allowing just 8 fantasy points per game over the last 4 weeks. They've given up just 131 yards on 12 receptions. Again, I want opportunities out of my tight end. I don't think there's an opportunity here. Cole Kmet comes in at number 10. Number 11 is Dallas Goedert. 12, I said, was Dalton Schultz. All right, 13, Kyle Pitts. I like him. Why do I like him? Because he scored double-digit points in 2 of his last 3 games and has a matchup against the Bears that makes him a viable option. Their defense has allowed 6 touchdowns and the 6th most points to the opposing tight ends, not to mention the 3rd most catches allowed. Number 14, you know what? Fire up Darren Waller too this week. The Rams have allowed 8 touchdowns and the 4th most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Number 15, if you're looking for a sleeper, Chigakonkwo comes to mind. As the Texans, they've been good against the position recently, 11.6 fantasy points per game. But on the season, they're allowing 14.1, which is the 4th most. Number 16, Hunter Henry. If he plays, I'm firing him up there as well. He's got a little bit of a connection there with Bailey Zappi. 17, Tucker Kraft. Tera likes him. I'm a little bit lower on him this week. But hey, if everyone else is missing in Green Bay, Tucker Kraft was flying up the board. Number 18, Pat Fairmouth. Number 19, Tyler Higbee. Number 20, Dalton Kincaid. Now, quickly, just kind of go over the top 16 defenses. We have San Francisco, Cleveland, Denver, Chicago, Baltimore in the top 5. New York, the New York Jets, the Buffalo Bills, the Dallas Cowboys, the Las Vegas Raiders at number 9, the Atlanta Falcons at 10. At 11, we got the Indianapolis Colts. Then 12 through 16 is the Eagles, the Chiefs, the Texans, the Dolphins, and the Rams. And that is it for your starts and sits. Now, Tera, when we look around the world here, when we're looking for fantasy questions to be answered on a daily basis, when we want to get our questions answered, where can we go? Where can we find you each and every week?
I mean, the best place to find me is Twitter. I can answer your questions there. You can find me at itsteratime. And you can also find me, you can find me on Fantasy Pros doing several live streams. That's a good place to get your start sit questions in. And then also my podcast, Dear Miss Fantasy, that is another place where you can ask me some questions.
And be sure to do that, because take advantage of these opportunities when you can. Tera, another great season here. If you want to look for me, right here on the Vipers Network is the first place to start. But you can also catch me doing some starts and sit stuff over at RotoBaller. With that all being said, this is week number 17. We got plenty of great content coming at you here in the offseason. So make sure you hit that like button. Make sure you subscribe so you do not miss all the great fantasy football analysis that Tera provides and some of the stuff that I bring out as well. So until next time, take care.